Hello, and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. Happy to have here with me today the fabulous, wonderful, amazing Mr. Brad Wartman. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Well, hi, Angela. Thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah, no problem. Well, you're here all the time anyway, because as frequent viewers know, Brad is our uh, our editor, our taper. That's not the word. Director. I don't know. He's everything. He's everything. That's what he is.
Almost, almost. Or
Yeah, just
as my
about.
wife says, make sure you marry Mr. Right. Just make sure his first name isn't always.
Yeah, there you go. Uh, so, and Brad and I are here to talk about overlooked science fiction films. As viewers of the show might know, when Brad's been on before, he's a huge sci-fi fan, and thought it would be an opportunity to look at some lesser-known science fiction films that we wanted to point out to audiences. Now, some of these are a little bit B grade, a little bit cheesy. Some of them are maybe a little bit more on the A grade level, but we have a good mix for you here today, and Brad can geek out on his sci-fi spectacularness here.
Yeah,
So,
some are Swiss, some are Gruyere. Let's
yeah,
put it that way.
exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So, Swiss or Gruyere, or I guess you could go with American cheese if you really want to go
That's right.
down.
Velveeta. That's it.
Velveeta, there you go. Okay, so well, we're going to start off with a Gruyere style one, I think. We'll see what Brad says, but this was my pick from 2022. The film is Neptune Frost. This is a film that made a ton of critics lists, didn't get much distribution, but is thankfully pretty widely available on streaming on services such as Canopy. I think you can even find it on Amazon. It's also on Criterion Channel as part of their Afrofuturism collection. And I'll get into a little bit about what Afrofuturism means in a minute. But first, on Neptune Frost, it centers on a relationship between Neptune, an intersex runaway, and Metalsia, a Colton miner, and they together form a hacker collective. Now, for those who are not familiar, and I wasn't, so I had to do a little research. Colton mining is a real thing. It's actually coltan is the mineral that's used to make things like your cell phones and computer chips and all sorts of things that power our technologies. And 71% of the coltan in the world is mined in Africa. So this is very much based in a reality of what's happening in modern day Africa. But like Afrofuturism is part of uh, what Afrofuturism is for folks that aren't familiar. It is about examining possible futures through a Black cultural lens. So, for a mainstream example, Black Panther is very much a part of the Afrofuturism perspective. It's sci-fi through a Black cultural lens. It's not always sci-fi; it can be fantasy, but it's imagined realities. So I think it goes back to music with the work of George Clinton and Sun Ra, and there's authors. The term itself wasn't really termed until the 90s, but the concept of Afrofuturism has been around for a really long time. Now, Neptune Frost is also a musical. So it's a sci-fi musical with a lot of really interesting music. It was produced by Lin-Manuel Miranda, for those who are familiar with him and his work with Hamilton and many other musicals. The music is nothing like that type of music. It's very much centered more to go with the story of these characters. Now, it is a somewhat a hard film to follow. It takes maybe two viewings to really understand fully what's going on. And even then, I'm not sure I fully understood what was happening in this movie, but I'm curious to hear what you thought, Brad.
Yeah. Yeah. Two viewings minimum, maybe three or four if you're especially willing to undergo a lot of pain in your life. It's, I think you put it well. Is that it? This is presented as Afrofuturism, uh, punk rock, not punk rock, well, maybe punk rock, but it is a musical, but not what you would think of as your traditional musical like Hamilton would be.
Hmm.
It is presented from the African perspective. And as you say, coltan is an actual mineral for it's made for cobalt. And so there are a lot of parallels and tie-ins to uh, what's going on in Africa today, but you have to that's a lot of that stuff is hidden from people. And in my viewings, it actually took me about an hour and 45-minute movie to really start to get what was going on
Hmm.
in that thing. And I think that's the one thing about the movie is that it's kind of the first hour is pretty disjointed and it's really hard to follow. The last 40 minutes it is much more presentable, but even
Yeah.
so, it's just not for the faint of heart, to put it to put it mildly.
No.
It's kind of like I was trying to think of that movie about set on a planet where it's all in a medieval age, and this observer comes in to. You remember the name of that film, perhaps? Um,
What period are we talking
Oh,
about?
it was well. It's set on another planet, but it's set in the medieval age. Anyway, it's just the bottom line is just it's a challenging film to watch. I think if you watch the whole thing and you go back and watch it again, you'll get more. You'll understand it better. The
Definitely.
first the first part of it better. But
Yeah.
that's yeah, that's the gist of it. It just is very different.
Yeah,
And
it is different. I
yeah.
have to say, though, the thing I did like about it, I had a hard time understanding the story as well. And I had to do some of this research on my own about, I kind of knew what Colton was, but I'm not a tech person, so I didn't exactly know. I knew it was something real because they showed them the opening scenes are with the miners and then they're being abused. And then the miners are kind of trying to strike against their oppressors. Um, but but I didn't understand exactly a lot what was going on because they're kind of trying to connect into this collective unconscious through this technology, and it's a little confusing as to what's going on at the beginning. But what I did love about it, I did like the music quite a bit, but the look of the film, it's absolutely just
Stunning.
beautiful to look at. The photography, I just thought, especially for what's probably a fairly low budget film, is pretty gorgeous. So I definitely say there are those who like their sci-fi more on the challenging side, or if you're interested in Afrofuturism, I wouldn't say, oh, go straight from Black Panther to this film. That might be a little bit jarring, but there is an Afrofuturism collection on Criterion Channel. This is one of the films in there. There's some other ones, but if you're interested in some of the concepts of like Wakanda from the Black Panther series and you want to explore more into that, definitely check out more Afrofuturism films. And then when you're feeling ready for that like PhD level, maybe jump into this film. But do you think you can recommend it though, Brad? It sounded like you were kind of on the fence.
Uh, I would recommend it for someone who's willing to put in the time to see it a couple of times. I mean, it is not going to be your Wakanda Forever. It is not going to be your
No,
Marvel
no,
movie. It's
no.
definitely something that, it's a thinking person's movie. Yeah, and until I saw it the second time, and I could then look back and understand what was trying to go on in the first, like I said, in the first hour of the movie, it feels
Hmm.
pretty disjointed and it's hard to
Yeah,
follow. And you have to just be willing to be patient and push your way through it. So.
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll move on to our next film, which I think you're going to introduce one of your picks.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about low budget films, and we'll talk about again maybe not Afrofuturism, but Afro near futurism coming from 1984 is the movie The Brother from Another Planet. And this was directed by John Sayles, who took $365,000 from his MacArthur Fellowship grant to make this movie. And it's set in New York City, and it's the story of an alien who crash lands off Brooklyn and comes ashore, and it's his exploration of the black experience as a black alien who is mute, and just take it from there. And it's given, like I said, it was a very inexpensive movie, low budget movie. Stars Joe Morton. I think it was the first film I ever saw him in. and he does a masterful job with as the lead playing a black mute alien and trying to navigate the culture of the mid 1980s in New York City. And it's a wonderful film. I mean, when I saw it, I was just I was in living in Houston, Texas when I saw it, and it just blew me away. You know,
Yeah.
I just was amazed. But anyway, so that's how I took it. How about you, Angela?
I've never seen this film before. It's a huge gap in my film history knowledge because it's been acclaimed for a long time and I loved it. I actually would like to own this film. I was going to ask you if there's a good version of it on Blu-ray because I watched it on one of the apps on my TV that had a free version. I can't remember if it was Tubi or one of those, but it is available on streaming, but it was the version I watched at least on streaming was not which definitely you could tell not hadn't been polished up much, so it was a rough cut, if you can say that. But I loved it too. I agree with you about the lead performance. It's a really difficult job to communicate a lot without speaking in a film, and especially because he's supposed to be an alien and he's a black alien, as you mentioned. So he's encountering all the racial issues in New York City in the 80s through this perspective of someone who's literally from another world. And so we can only guess sometimes what's going through his mind, but he expresses a lot just through his face. And there's also a little bit of an action sequence because it turns out he's being hunted by some of these other aliens that have come down, we think presumably probably from his home planet, that are going after him, but we're not exactly sure. At least I wasn't sure at first.
Hmm.
But a lot of the interactions is both comedic as well as social commentary because it's also a very funny movie. There's a lot of really funny scenes with him. He has the ability to heal with his touch, and so he's able to, and including things like fixing the video arcade, which he
Hmm.
helps out some people and makes some friends that way. And I love that he basically becomes friends. He ends up at this bar, this black-owned bar, where there's kind of this group of regulars who sort of befriend him, despite the fact they think he's a really odd fellow and they kind of become protective of him, which I
Hmm.
also love that aspect of the film.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned about the bounty hunters. So the two bounty hunters are one of them is John Sayles himself,
Right,
and the
yeah,
other
uh-huh.
one is Jason Stratham. Is
Yes.
Stratham? Yeah, Stratham. And
David Strathern,
oh
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, no.
So they and what was interesting about that, I really thought that Sales had it right because in the end, I'll give a little away a little bit of the movie as the predatory cat enters the scene, just
Yeah.
like the predatory cat. These two characters are bounty hunters, and as the final scene comes in, they start chasing him down. Sales comes running across, and he has this kind of loose gait where he's kind of his arms are hanging down at his side and he's just kind of loping, just in the way that you would see a lion trying to chase down a gazelle or something like that.
Hmm.
And so it was a really, I thought the characters themselves really did a good job. And so it was good. It was a very good movie, and I can highly recommend it. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I do have the DVD if you're interested
Is
in
it a pretty
watching it.
good transfer? Because the one I watched on streaming was really, really bad. It was
Well,
pretty
it's
not a great trend.
1984, you know,
Yeah, I know, but they could do it in high def. I think,
yeah,
one of the problems, John Sayles is one of the most underrated American filmmakers. He's always been independent. He
right.
struggles to get financing for his movies. I think his last film now has been 12 years ago. Even though he's still alive, he just can't get financing for his movies, which makes me really sad because he's made some of the greatest American films ever made. David Strathairn has actually been in quite a few of his films. And he continues to struggle to find films. He often would take jobs as a screenwriter on like Hollywood projects, Piranha being a really famous one that he did, but just to like get money to make his own movies so that so he would be brought in to like, rewrite or kind of clean up bad Hollywood scripts to make money to do that in order to finance his own movies, which is really sad that he has to do that still after 30 years of making great films. So, but
Hmm.
definitely can recommend this one. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
Okay, yeah. So for our next film, uh, I want to ask the audience and say, when someone describes this plot to you, what movie do you think of? So you have a group of scientists who build a massive supercomputer that then gains sentience and takes over the world. Now, probably most of you are thinking of Terminator and Skynet. And what if I didn't tell you though that back in 1970 there was a movie called Colossus, the Forbin Project. Well, it's the same, it's a very much the same theme, only done with 1960s technology.
Hmm.
And the movie stars Eric Braeden, who actually is his stage name because he's actually German. And I was watching an interview with him, and he actually took the name Eric Braeden because the producers for the film didn't want him to use his German name. But anyway, it was kind of one of his starts into the film industry. It also has Susan Clark. It has Aaron Moran, who was later on in Happy Days in a little bit role, and even oh man, who was it? There's like this brief cameo, like just a second or two. Um, oh shoot, now I can't remember the name. Anyway, just so it's about the people who build a supercomputer that then takes over the world, and the voice of Colossus is probably the most scary thing about the movie because the voice comes off in this kind of overly uh, kind of it's a lot of distortion in the voice. Like
Hmm.
that is the voice of Colossus. I come in peace. It may be the peace of all time, or it may be the peace of the deaths of millions of you. And it's just like,
It's
but the
very,
the
yeah, it's
voice.
pretty creepy because it's distorted too. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So anyway, I saw this at the drive-in theater when I was in high school, and I just I loved it. I think it's
Yeah.
probably one of the seminal movies for me. But how about you, Angela?
Well, yeah, and thank you for loaning me your copy because it's actually really hard to find. You can find it at libraries and different places. It's not easy to find, which is surprising because it actually is. When you look it up, it's actually considered a seminal sci-fi film. So it's surprising that no one's put it out on streaming or it's not readily available. I did enjoy this one more than I thought I would. At first, I started, I was like, oh, this is so cheesy. They have this big computer, and you see where it's going right from the beginning because like, oh, we're going to hook up all of our defense systems to the computer. I thought, oh, this isn't going to go well. But I have to say, it's more relevant than ever because we have this debate going right now, going on in our world with AI getting so powerful. We've had multiple tech leaders, including Elon Musk and one of the founders of Apple, sign on to this thing saying, hey, we need to slow down on how powerful we're making our AI systems, specifically because of some of these fears that AI could not just replace us, but take over if it becomes too powerful. And this is a debate we're having right now in our society, even though it sounds like science fiction. It doesn't come in the form as it does in this movie of a giant computer that talks to you through a screen. In some ways, in our modern world, it's more scary because we've got the cloud, we've got things everywhere, right? So it's sort of more invisible. But what I thought was interesting about it is they have all these different plans they try to enact in the movie to try to stop Colossus. They have multiple plans they come up with, and at every step, they're kind of turned away because Colossus outsmarts them. They've actually created something that's smarter than them, faster thinking than them, and takes over quite easily. And Eric Braeden, as you mentioned, for those who are not familiar with him, he became very famous playing Victor on The Young and the Restless. So that's a call out from my childhood of watching that soap opera with my family, and he's still on that show. So he does a really great job of playing this, very kind of confident, almost arrogant scientist at the beginning of the movie who's invented this thing and quickly finds that his own creation has taken over his life. And so then he develops this romance with one of the people on the project team, played by Susan Clark. So that's kind of an interesting interplay as well. But yeah, it has a lot of, it was just interesting timing as I was watching this film all over the news are these conversations happening right now about different people who are worried about AI and replacing jobs. We have AI bots now that can do copy editing and writing and mathematics. So are we replacing writers and mathematicians in our society with AI? So I think there's a lot of, of course, the skeptics say, oh, it's not going to ever happen. But I think this movie shows that there's been fears about this happening for a long time,
Right.
and and some of it has become quite powerful. So I think the fact that some of these tech leaders are even saying, hey, we need to slow down and really think about what we're doing is a pretty powerful statement. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and the fact that this came out, like I said, in 1970, that
70,
was
yeah.
just um, it was just impressive. And you have to remember this is coming out at the same time that movies like the Andromeda Strain were coming out. Uh, Another little known movie called Phase Four, that I
I
watched.
don't know that one. I remember
Oh,
Andromeda
well, we
Strain
should we
though.
should have we should have reviewed that one too. I
Oh,
mean
we can
that's
always have a future sci-fi, you know.
yeah,
There's always
yeah.
more sci-fi to review.
But yeah, it's just a terrific film, and probably of the films that we're reviewing today, it had the highest budget.
Yeah,
So
no, this one, yeah, that's why I was surprised that it's actually the hardest to find. It had the highest, but it was put out by a major studio. I think it was Universal because
yeah,
it came out, when it came up on my screen, I was like, oh yeah, this is. I'm really surprised this one isn't out. Maybe someone will watch the show and put it out for people to watch. So
yeah. And the copy that I loaned you is a Blu-ray copy. So there is a company that went back in and re-edited that film, and I'd seen I have a DVD copy, and it was a pretty bad press. And this is when I saw this press, I realized I'd forgotten just how good of the quality of the film was. You know,
right, yeah, no, it looked
so
really good. I was really impressed. It almost
yeah,
it looked very high def. That's why I was so disappointed with Brother from Another Planet that no one's put it out and really given it a good high def treatment because it deserves it as another
yeah.
sci-fi classic. So, okay,
Okay.
well, I think it's time to move on to Velveeta, which is definitely what this next film is. The creation, this was my pick. I'm fully to blame, but sometimes you got to have a little cheese with your you got to have some Velveeta with your high-end cheese, right? If you're
Yeah.
gonna have brie, you got to have the Velveeta. And our Velveeta is the creation of the Humanoids from 1962, directed by Wesley Berry. Don't know who that is. Don't know if he ever made anything else. Didn't look it up actually. But this is based in a post-nuclear war society in the future. Humans have declining birth rates, and they become dependent on human-like robots who the description says they look like humans, other than they have blue skin and no hair and weird eyes. They really don't look like not much like humans, but yeah, they're human-like. They're human approximation robots. And there's a group called the Order of the Flesh and Blood that have started up, and they're kind of a reactionary group that are fearful that the robots are taken too much power. They're suspicious of them. They call them clickers as an insult. And the lead character is a member of the Order of the Flesh and Blood who starts to become involved in a romance with a woman and starts to discover, how should I say this, some new things about himself. And his own sister is actually in a relationship with a one of the robots. So it's a very cheesy movie. I will just tell you that this one definitely looks like it has a low budget. It looks like the sets were like constructed, literally out of, construction paper or something, very flimsy. One of the disappointing things about this movie, it actually kind of dragged a little bit for me. It's very talky compared to some of the other movies we've reviewed where, with the sci-fi, you kind of want something else to happen. The technology, there's a lot of explanatory prose in this movie where they're like, where they kind of have to draw everything out for you, like, oh, this is what this meant, and let's continue to explain it to you because you're not understanding the plot, even though the plot isn't that hard to understand. There's a lot of
Mhm.
explanatory prose in the movie, which I found kind of tiresome after a while. I was like, okay, let's just get to some cool robots doing something cool action. But again, another one that has this kind of cautionary tale a little bit, although there was also some articles that talked about that the film, because this came out in the 1962, was also kind of looking at civil rights through a different lens, which is another interesting thing because the robots in this one aren't exactly evil, I would say. I'm kind of curious to get your take on that, though, Brad.
Well, I thought this was a good segue from Colossus because one of the things about Colossus is even though it's a frightening thesis and the character itself is pretty frightening, you have to remember that the computer itself, Colossus, is trying to do something that it considers in the best interests of mankind.
Right.
And in the same way, creation of the humanoids is very much like that as well.
Yeah.
And because in the end, and I don't think we're giving any spoilers to talk about the ending, the humanoids, the clickers, are creating basically shells for humans to inhabit because the population of humans since the nuclear war is steadily declining. There are very few new births, and so they see this as the way to preserve humanity. Um,
Hmm.
Really interesting, like you said, it's a very low budget movie. 1962, coming out of the 1950s nuclear Holocaust scenario, so it's got that incorporated in it.
Hmm.
Um, I thought it was pretty interesting that a number of the props in the movie are from other films. Like in the beginning, they talk about the first versions of the humanoids, and they're actually using this one of the outfits, the suits for the aliens from Earth versus the Flying Saucers. So
Oh, really? They just
yeah,
recycled suits from another film?
right. And then
Oh,
there's a there and then there's a scene where they're in the what they call the temple, which is where the humanoids go to recharge. They're standing in these tubes. Well, those tubes come from the movie This Island Earth. You know, so
oh, wow. Did you
so
do all this research to figure that out?
oh, I've seen this. I've seen this a couple of times. So
Oh,
I
you've
just thought
seen
it
this
was.
movie before? Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't realize you'd
yeah,
seen it. Okay, yeah,
and yeah, you're right. It's very much Velveeta. The characters from the Flesh and Blood are wearing uniforms with these uh, intricate patterns that look like they're gray, so they look like they come from Confederate Army
yeah. Hmm.
uniforms, which is also an interesting tie-in, I think.
Hmm.
As you say, there's a lot that you can read into this film about civil rights, the future of humanity, what AI is capable of doing, and on a cheesy, low budget movie that didn't get a lot of attention, but I thought it was
Not
a good
any
film.
attention, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
didn't it?
right,
So I
right.
was reading, I was looking it up online, and did it even get released? Really, or
Yes,
get like a? It did. Okay, it got
yeah,
an actual release. There seemed to be some debate about when it even actually came out, so that's why I was curious about that on Wikipedia. It said, was it 61 or 62? Because there were like some early flyers showing maybe they tried to release it in 61, so it was like an independent release, I think maybe.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which
No,
is interesting. So definitely it was more of a drive-in type of movie, probably. That
definitely.
did you see
And
it? When did you first see it?
I saw it on a local TV station where I grew up on Saturday afternoons.
Oh,
They
okay.
would show sci-fi movies, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, Creation of the Humanoids, um, Cyborg 2087. I mean, all this stuff. Oops.
Interestingly, this one's easier to find than Colossus, despite its low
Yeah,
budget. So you can find this one on streaming channels and even for free in some cases. Or I can't remember if on this one I ended up just renting it on Amazon for a couple of bucks, or if I found it on a free streaming. I think it might have been a free streaming channel. So you can
yeah,
find it on streaming if you're interested in some major Velveeta, maybe with a side of something a little bit more serious, like the earlier ones we reviewed. But yeah, there were aspects of it I enjoyed. I did think that it was interesting to think about in the context of when it was made in the 60s for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
So this
absolutely.
was a lot of fun, Brad. Thank you. I enjoyed watching these. It was nice to, especially some of these a little bit on the lighter side. So that was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, always,
great.
always
Okay.
fun.
Okay, well, check out our reviews on our website, realfilmsnobs.com, and we're on Facebook. And especially subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just hit that little subscribe bell, and you'll get updates when we have new shows out. We're on CC Media, Scan TV in Silverton, Corvallis Access Media. You can listen to us on KMUZ Radio or KMWV, and we also are on podcast. I'd like to thank our fabulous crew, which is mainly these days Brad Wartman, and of course my fabulous co-host Brad Wartman, and our sponsors. Thank you very much. Have a great day and great movies.
Bye, everybody.